So lately I've been doing come follow me videos with shorts, and I haven't done one of these kind of off the cuff stream of conscious videos in a while. However, I feel impressed to share these thoughts, and hopefully it might help some people out there in their walk with God or their walk towards God. So, one of the things that I have stressed throughout my videos is the idea of improvement and how improvement is a form of godliness and how striving for improvement is what God desires of us. And we can really, if we just take a step back to analyze the logic behind this, really makes sense. So if we take as a premise that God is who he is because he's the best at what he does, he is the representation of the most optimal being and what he's able to do and achieve. And then we take the next premise that we can become, that our job is to become like him, then it follows that in order to become like him, we need to grow to be like him. If he is who he says he is and we need to grow to be like him, then our path to doing so is the path of improvement. It is continually overcoming challenges and becoming better than we were before. That's the only way we can really ascend to God, is we improve. We grow line upon line, precept upon precept. There is no such thing in heaven as we simply walk a covenant path or we simply perform our church callings, however diligently they are and however reluctant we are to perform them. There's no such thing as just doing those things and then all of a sudden God just snaps us into gods. That would violate our agency, first and foremost, because to change us into beings that we didn't ever want to be through our actions would be actually unjust and unfair, because God would be changing us and putting us into a condition that we're not ready for. It's actually pretty cruel, because even though God is flooded with joy, he also has all things before him. That's a pretty deep topic, but suffice it to say that God sees the suffering in the world, and he sees more than just this world, but worlds. He dwells and he inhabits the space between order and chaos. And for most people, that is not a place of comfort, and that would not be considered paradise. And again, we get that example often in scriptures, and Mount Sinai is a pretty good example of what is associated with God's presence. It's thunder, lightning, fire. It's not rainbows and roses, at least not apparently. It is if you get accustomed to it, but in any case. So anyways, that's the kingdom of God. That's God, to be like God. And the kingdom of God is a hierarchy based on individuals at different talents and abilities who are organized around his kingdom to carry out his purposes. And I've discussed this in my slides. I encourage those who find these ideas to be new to go check out those videos. They're the most recent ones on stewardship and agency, are good starters. So in any case, that's setting up kind of God's kingdom. It's a kingdom of improvement. It's a kingdom of growth. God is the God of life. Life refers to flourishing, advancement, progression. Everything God does is to improve and benefit. Even when Moroni talks about um, good works, whatever is good comes from God. A close reading of that verse, which I have a video I've done, and I'm going to get to that. I'll try to do this. Come follow me. But you'll see that what Moroni is really getting at is he's saying anything that comes that is good will improve, right? And so that's the distinction. The good is what improves. Okay, so I think I made that case pretty well. So now I want to get into some practical ways of looking at how we hinder our improvement. And one of those comes in the form of feedback and correction. So one of the best ways to improve is just to receive feedback. And intuitively, I think we can agree that this is true. If you're trying to teach a kid how to ride a bike, you need to tell them what they're doing wrong. If you're a coach teaching an athlete how to shoot, pass, catch, whatever the sport may be, you're going to have to point out areas where they're not performing right, areas where they're messing up. You need to call them out on that. Otherwise, they're not going to perform as an athlete, or they're going to be limited. And so correction is very important. And that's why in Proverbs it says, despise not the chastisings of the Lord. Despise not his corrections, because correction is the way we improve. But the challenge arises is when we receive that correction, because oftentimes when we receive correction, it's kind of condemning, because it reveals to us something that we kind of know is true. I mean, let's be honest. When we're called out on things, we deep down we know that is right, or we know that we made some mistake. And so what often happens is we instead of embracing that discomfort, that pain, that guilt, and using that to drive us forward, we try to cover it. We try to hide it. We try to shift away from it because it makes us feel bad, and we don't want to feel bad. And what we're actually doing is we're just prioritizing our present feeling over our future success. And we want to feel good in the moment. And so we reject the correction, and I'll explain how, but we reject the correction so we can feel good in the present. And then, but because we don't ever fix that defect, we just let it continue on, and we go through the same cycles of misery and suffering, which most of our misery and suffering is done unnecessarily. And we're not even really getting into the level of trials from God. It's really just us stumbling. And we keep doing that because we're never correcting it in the present. Okay, so then how do we do that? What are ways that we try to hide it? Well, one of the things that happens is when we're corrected is we attack the other person and their motives and say, oh, well, you just think you're so self-righteous. You think you know everything. You act like you're better than us, right? I mean, that's Laman and Lemuel with Nephi. Sorry, I'm seeing my glare, and my glasses might be a little messy. But that's Laman and Lemuel with Nephi, right? You're better than us. You think you can rule over us. And all they're doing is trying to hide the guilt that they feel. And so they're shifting the blame, and they're making the corrector the villain. And then when you make them the villain, then you can demonize them, right? And that's what happens a lot with society is we demonize those who are more successful because their success is their success condemns us. I mean, that's really what this whole woke progressive movement is. It's a bunch of people who have lived subpar lives, and they resent those who are more successful because of the way they've lived. And they want to use some third party, the government in this case, as a strong arm to make things equal so they don't have to feel inadequate. They don't have to feel like their lives are meaningless, which a lot of it is. And if you look at them, you can tell that they have made a series of poor decisions. And instead of acknowledging that, they're just choosing to demonize some group, whether it be the capitalists, the wealthy, the billionaires, whatever it may be, because they can't come to grips with their own failures, and they don't want to. So that's one way. So oftentimes, if you correct someone, they might just say, "Oh, well, you just think you're so great, whatever." Another way that we can, and this might be you, and so that's why I'm sharing this, is kind of let you reflect and see, are you guilty of that? When you receive correction, do you just immediately attack and label the other person? Another way, though, that is, it's equally dangerous. Well, yeah, I'd say it's equally dangerous, but also a little more insidious because it's not apparent. Is we try to insulate ourselves from the correction by attacking the way the correction is given. And this is the tone police, right? That, well, the way you said it wasn't very nice. And so what we do by that is we say, well, because we don't disagree it's not true necessarily, or I mean, we might not tell the person it's true, but in order to avoid having to face that truth, we say, well, the way it was given, the message wasn't the way it should have been given. And so because you said it was rude, then therefore I don't have to listen to it because it was rude and you're rude, and so therefore your message is nullified. If you think about that, that's a way that we really try to avoid, is we put it all back on the person and say, well, you should have said it better. Next time, say it better. And then sometimes it's like this inevitable standard where it's like, oh, no, tone's still wrong, tone's still wrong, tone's still wrong. And what we do is we end up just never receiving the actual correction because the tone wasn't delivered correctly. And sure, there might be ways that we can say things better, but if you really think about it, let's just look at an example. I mean, it's a very, very simple example, but if the sun is shining and I yell at someone and say, hey, the sun's shining. Now, that the tone might be a little crazy, but does that change the fact that the sun is shining? No, it doesn't. The sun is still shining. So the point is that, yeah, tone may make things harder, but the real question is what is being said true? And if it's true, then it doesn't matter the tone. It matters whether the thing is true, because tone doesn't change truth or not, right? I yell at you and tell you the sun's there. The sun's still there. It's not going to change. And you can say you don't like my tone, but it's not going to change the fact that the sun's blazing in your eyes. And that's oftentimes the truth. And so one of the ways that we interfere with our development and improvement is we get so caught up on how something's said rather than just identifying whether the thing being said is true. Now, if it's not true, that's fine. You say, okay, I disagree, and you move on. But if it is true, then you are now given a new way of developing, a new way of improving. And so I encourage you to go, as you interact with other people, as you maybe deal with people you find are difficult, reflect and consider whether you are growing a tendency to reject things because of the way it's said, because it comes off harsh. Because sometimes it's just going to come off harsh, and sometimes the person is completely justified in being harsh. Sometimes they don't mean to. It's just what it is. But it doesn't give us a license to reject just because it's harsh, because the object that we're after is truth. And the truth acquired is what leads to improvement. It is gathering the truth, applying that, gaining an awareness of more truth, gathering that, applying, and so forth, until you have acquired all the light and truth to ascend to God's presence.